Fidelity Investments. Common sense. Uncommon results.
Coming up, Inside Politics 92, followed by more of Early Prime after this local break here on CNN.
Get back on track. Choose Medicab Pharmacy. You'll enjoy instant access to your pharmacist. No searching, no waiting, no racing against time. Just instant service, instant savings, instant attention. So avoid running into delays by taking the convenient way. Medicab Pharmacy. All the care, all the savings, all now.
This is CNN.
We'll see you at the top of the hour. Inside Politics is next.
Just before that, a check of the business news in New York. Bill Hartley joins us.
Thanks, Luke. It was a record day on Wall Street today. Strength in high-tech issues and positive results from the government's $11 billion auction powering the blue chips to another all-time high. The Dow ended the day in record territory, up 25.25 points at just under 3,277. Volume once again heavy, 230 million shares traded. Broader and secondary markets ended higher. The over-the-counter market and the American Stock Exchange at new highs also. OPEC is moving to prop up sliding oil prices. The cartel today beginning a two-day meeting arguing over production quotas for spring. The key to the agreement, getting powerhouse producer Saudi Arabia to cut back. Oil prices ended slightly lower in New York today. U.S. benchmark crude off a penny at $19.27 a barrel. I'm Bill Hartley, live at the New York Stock Exchange. Inside Politics is next.
So from this moment on, I'm a candidate for President of the United States, officially.
Incumbent George Bush formally affirms what everybody already knew. He wants 4 more years in the Oval Office.
Bill Clinton remains on the defensive about the Vietnam-era draft. Will a letter he wrote in '69 hurt or help him? It's all part of Inside Politics 92.
This is Inside Politics 92 with Bernard Shaw in Washington and Catherine Crier at the CNN Center in Atlanta.
Thanks for joining us. Well, if anyone didn't know, it's official. George Bush is running for re-election. The president declared his intentions this morning in Washington. His announcement offered brickbats for Congress, a backhanded slap at conservative pit bull Pat Buchanan, and the assertion that he has an agenda for the domestic scene. Once rated a lead pipe cinch for a second term, Bush has seen his approval ratings dragged down by an ailing economy. His summation of this year's election.
In 1992, the American people will decide what kind of leadership they want. They'll decide which team has the character, the experience, and the toughness to make the important decisions. And they could cast their lot with a lot of fresh faces who tout stale ideas, but they won't. Voters know the difference between a sound bite and sound policy.
Then it was on to the first field of battle, New Hampshire. Included on Bush's itinerary in the state he's visited only once before in this election year, an address to the New Hampshire legislature. Latest snapshot survey, the CNN USA Today Gallup poll of registered GOP voters in New Hampshire shows Bush maintaining roughly a 2-to-1 advantage over challenger Pat Buchanan.
He's bucking the numbers, but Buchanan tells IP92 he can beat Bush in a man-to-man campaign contest. While the combative conservative says the president's re-election announcement had some good lines, he also suggests parts were more fantasy than fact.
Once again, the rhetoric versus the reality. Mr. Bush got up there and said government is too big and it costs too much. Under him, it has grown to record levels and taxes have gone to historical highs. George Bush has presided over the very government he is condemning.
Meantime, the Boston Herald has endorsed Buchanan in a front-page editorial that blasts his opponent as a wimp and a Beltway president. According to the newspaper, George Bush has betrayed those who voted for him in 1988.
And to the Democratic side, a new sign that Bill Clinton has fallen further in New Hampshire, and he's having a hard time getting up. The latest CNN USA Today Gallup tracking poll shows Paul Tsongas widening his lead in the Granite State with 37% support. Clinton seeks to 22%. Bob Kerrey, Tom Harkin, and Jerry Brown round out the pack. Since Thursday, Clinton and Tsongas have virtually flip-flopped poll positions. Tsongas is skipping stumping today to prepare for Sunday's Democratic debate. As for Clinton, a newly released letter is heating up the controversy over his dealings with the draft. That story now from our national political correspondent, Gene Randall in Manchester. Gene?
Catherine, the letter was written by 23-year-old Rhodes Scholar Bill Clinton. He wrote it to the ROTC program head at the University of Arkansas. In it, Clinton explained why he pulled out of an agreement to enter the program, even though that was part of the deal to get him a student draft deferment continuance. Clinton also used the letter to describe his belief that the military draft was illegitimate. Word the letter would show up on Wednesday night's edition of Nightline on ABC prompted a Clinton effort to limit the potential for further damage to his presidential campaign. Part of the strategy, attacking the way the letter surfaced.
This morning, in a telephone conversation with me, Mr. Koppel confirmed to me that it is his understanding that ABC received the letter from two different sources, both of whom got it from the Pentagon. If this is true, the leak violates the Federal Privacy Act, and the fact that this leak apparently occurred just days before the New Hampshire primary can be no coincidence.
In the letter, Clinton, on his decision against going into the University of Arkansas's ROTC program, quote, "After I signed the ROTC letter of intent, I began to wonder whether the compromise I had made with myself was not more objectionable than the draft would have been, because I had no interest in the ROTC program in itself, and all I seemed to have done was to protect myself from physical harm." Clinton also wrote of what he called his anguish and loss of self-regard and self-confidence over his student deferment. But earlier, in the three-page letter, Clinton condemned the draft system. Quote, "No government really rooted in limited parliamentary democracy should have the power to make its citizens fight and kill and die in a war they may oppose." He wrote, "One of my roommates is a draft resistor. He is one of the bravest, best men I know." On his own decision against becoming a resistor, quote, "I decided to accept the draft in spite of my beliefs for one reason, to maintain my political viability within the system." And Clinton termed his initial ROTC plan, quote, "the one way left in which I could possibly, but not positively, avoid both Vietnam and resistance." Bill Clinton, Wednesday morning, said it was easy to misread what he had written nearly a quarter century ago.
I was bitterly opposed to the war. I wanted to follow the law. I wanted to do what I had to do. And what is clear here is that I gave up my deferment before I had any idea what the lottery number would be.
In fact, Clinton's high lottery number kept him out of the draft. Clinton said his campaign would run the letter in a Manchester Union Leader newspaper ad on Thursday, and that he would trust the voters of New Hampshire to end what he called the road of dirty tricks. The Pentagon, meanwhile, says it's investigating the release of the letter, and the White House denies any involvement. Catherine?
Gene, assess for us how much this controversy has really sidetracked Clinton's campaign in the last several days.
Well, Catherine, Clinton said today he would fight like hell to get his campaign back on the real issues. But at this point, this is the real issue, getting this controversy behind him. So certainly he is sidetracked by this.
Gene Randall in Manchester. Thank you. Bernie?
Other Democratic contenders took time on the trail in New Hampshire today to blast the newest official candidate for president, George Bush. The abortion issue was the weapon for Tom Harkin's verbal assault.
You know, George Bush and these so-called conservatives, they run all over saying how they want to get the government out of our private lives. But on the most personal, private decision a woman could ever make, they want the government. Well, I'm going to tell George Bush and the rest of the American people when I'm the nominee of my party, you, George Bush, may trust the government, but I trust the women of America to make that decision and not the government.
Bob Kerrey, who's talked of the possibility of raising taxes, took aim at Bush's flip-flop on taxes.
His number one principle, the defining moment for him in 1988, here in New Hampshire, was signing a no new tax pledge. And he found himself in 1990 reversing himself on that deeply felt principle, and then found himself declining in the polls, and he has been indifferent to the terrifying nature of this deficit ever since. I mean, he is performing to get reelected.
Jerry Brown delivered his angry outsider spiel today at 2 stops in New Hampshire. He was greeted by a flock of fans and an appearance at the Colonial Theater in Keene. Coming up next, the president is off and running for re-election. We'll get 2 views of his political evolution and changing image. And later on Inside Politics 92, Bush and Buchanan square off on the airwaves of New Hampshire. We will assess the accuracy and implications of their ads.
I was seeing my parents off, and I realized...
Dad, what do you got in here? Gardening equipment?
They've planned their retirement for a long time.
Common sense says the time to plan for your future is today.
One day, it's going to be our turn.
And Fidelity Investments, America's largest mutual fund company, can help you begin.
Debbie? One day, Jeff sat down to figure out how much we'll have for retirement.
How's it going, Einstein?
Very funny. Take a look at this.
I thought we were doing a pretty good job. At this rate, we'll never retire.
Over 2 million Americans trust their retirement savings to Fidelity with choices like Magellan Fund. Magellan's approach to stock investing has made it the #1 performing mutual fund for the past 15-year period. So call Fidelity now for this free booklet, a common sense guide to planning for retirement. You'll also receive everything you need to take your first step. Call 1-800-525-7700. Fidelity Investments. Common sense. Uncommon results.
Welcome to Hotel Views. Holiday Inn versus Ramada. Bob?
Susan, you dish towel. Look, I go to Holiday Inn. You want to know why? Because everybody goes there. It's a fact. Look it up.
Bob, you doorknob. Ramada gives you comfortable rooms and fine restaurants just like Holiday, but they also give you something extra. They're so sure you'll like them better, they'll put $5 right in your hand when you switch from Holiday. See, getting extra is good. If you didn't have a vacancy sign between your ears, you'd know that. Ramada's in, Holiday's out.
On CNN tonight, House Ways and Means Chairman Dan Rostenkowski on Moneyline. Then, the president officially enters the race. Does he deserve 4 more years? In the crossfire. All tonight on CNN.
As we've seen, George Bush made it official today, announced that, yes, he is a candidate for president. Throughout his career, he's been a bit of a political chameleon, able to change his stripes and his political positions to adapt to his surroundings. So how will he perform in what, in all likelihood, will be the last campaign of his political career? Joining us now in Washington, 2 men with differing views about George Bush, the politician. Dan Murphy, retired Admiral, Bush deputy at the Central Intelligence Agency from 1976 to 77, and then Vice President Bush's chief of staff from 1980 to 85. And Robert Novak, columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times. Gentlemen, welcome. And Mr. Murphy, let me begin, Admiral Murphy, let me begin with you. George Bush, 1980, many would have described him as a moderate running against Ronald Reagan, then 8 years as vice president, 4 years as president. Describe the evolution of the political man, George Bush.
Well, George Bush is a conservative. There's no doubt in anybody's mind who has ever worked with him that he is a conservative. His evolution as a politician, I think, is kind of exaggerated. I think it's the same George Bush we've had all along. He's smarter and wiser and more experienced today than he was, say, back when he was head of CIA, but it's still the same Bush, and he's still the same conservative.
Bob Novak, experience the only difference, or have there been some political shifts?
No, I think there's been a remarkable change in President Bush. At heart, I think in his state of mind, his psychological makeup, he is a liberal Republican, not so much that he is on the issues far to the left of the consensus, but it's a state of mind that he believes that you can sit down with the Democrats and make a deal with them. He believes in his heart that government works. And in 1988, when he won the nomination under the advice of Lee Atwater, his very astute political manager, he convinced the conservatives that he was a conservative. Now, for the last 3 years, he has been making deals with the Democrats, and now that the election is at hand, he is once again posing, not posing, but taking a conservative posture. I think Pat Buchanan, I have to agree with it when he says that he governs as a liberal, but he campaigns as a conservative.
Well, in terms of campaign imaging, Admiral, let me ask you a question. The wimp factor was something brought up in 1988. Lapdog was a term that columnist George Will put on George Bush. But even today, the Boston Herald, in its endorsement for Pat Buchanan, returned to the wimp element in characterizing the president. Is that a fair description?
No, it's not fair at all. It's rather ridiculous. And
where did this perception come from?
They must be pretty hard up there to come up with the same old terms that we used before. He's not a wimp. I think he demonstrated that during the war in the Kuwait-Iraqi war. And anybody who can consider him a wimp today just doesn't know George Bush, or is just trying to make a new headline, ridiculous headline.
Well, Bob, that's interesting. Was this something that stayed with him until the Gulf War, and is it something that's been excised?
Well, frankly, I always thought that the wimp description was totally ridiculous. He was the youngest aviator in the Navy. He was a hero in World War II. Actually, he's a very tough guy. He's a guy who remembers his enemies and treats them as such. He's a fellow that you mess with at your risk, as Saddam Hussein found. I would say that anybody who calls him a wimp is off base. Some of the toughest guys I know, toughest people I know, are liberals, and there's no equation between somebody who is a moderate politically and somebody who is a wimp morally.
All right, Bob, address for me then the image that some are portraying, and that is that Bush is out of touch with the American people. He goes into a discount store and buys socks to invigorate the economy. What about this image?
Well, I think I think if you're president, you do get out of touch. If you're in any highfalutin position in the government, you don't do the things ordinary people do. You have them done for you. They always said that when Eisenhower came back after the war, they had to teach him how to dial a telephone again. So I don't think that's unusual. But I think, frankly, Catherine, all that stuff about being out of touch and whether he buys socks, I think it's ridiculous. I think the problem with President Bush and why the right wing of the party is angry with him is the deals he has made on taxes, on civil rights, on the environment, and the fact that he has permitted a regulatory reign of terror shut down the economy. Those are issues. They have nothing to do with his personality.
Admiral Dan Murphy and Robert Novak, thanks for joining us. Bernie?
It was New Hampshire that breathed new life into the Bush campaign in 1988, but 4 years later, New Hampshire is feeling jilted. After all, Bush promised jobs, 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 and in New Hampshire, the unemployment lines have gotten longer and longer and longer. CNN's Candy Crowley now on Bush, New Hampshire, and the politics of joblessness.
It's 2 degrees and 7:45 in the morning. On the unemployment line in Manchester, you can't see the campaign trail, but you get talked about a lot.
50,000 jobs lost. Homes foreclosed and auctioned off.
The question is, what kind of a labor policy do you have to cushion the blow?
The answer doesn't seem all that complicated on the unemployment line.
You got to free up some money somewhere to get construction going.
Even where construction is going, they worry it might stop.
They better start creating some jobs. Got a lot of guys loafing now. I got to get them back to work. Definitely.
Any of the presidential candidates?
Are they gonna? Do they make sense? Not really.
New Hampshire's jobless rate remained stubbornly high last year, dipping below the 7% mark just 3 times. The yearly high, December's 7.8%, was 0.8% above the national average.
I have an economic blueprint that will put people to work in New Hampshire next year.
In 4 years since the last primary, the unemployment rate in New Hampshire has risen 254%. They are older now and wiser and more cynical.
And now people decide that it's an election year. Let's talk about the economy. You know, where were they before?
I felt before, like I said, I felt President Bush was going to do us good. And I'm sure he's done what he can, but he's just let everybody around here down. So I don't really have a lot of faith in anybody.
Jobs for American workers and growing room for the American dream.
On the unemployment line, bitterness can keep you from dreaming.
Really too late for anybody right now. We should have started something 2 years ago instead of messing up everybody else's life.
You don't have a choice. Yeah. They've made it for you.
It is 2 in the afternoon at a job retraining class in Bedford.
So it's to create more higher-paying jobs, and we can do that. When I'm not out here doing something like this, most of what I do at home is the work of trying to get and keep jobs.
It's basically a matter of getting capital into small companies and let them grow.
In the retraining center and on the unemployment line, it all seems like just talk.
They all have a different plan, but I'm still standing here in line.
Candy Crowley, CNN, Manchester, New Hampshire.
I was going through some trade confirmations, and bang, it hit me.
This has got to stop.
My broker talked me into something I didn't want. It's not doing well, and I still paid all this commission.
Common sense says you shouldn't pay for advice you don't want. That's why active investors come to Fidelity for discount brokerage and save up to 65% on stock and option commissions.
Yesterday before work, I called my broker. Not in. Called at lunchtime. Out.
At lunch? Gone for the day.
Called after work. Gone.
No.
You can trade round the clock and enjoy the great service that's made Fidelity America's largest mutual fund company. At locations nationwide, even by PC with never a sales pitch. Over 2 million investors know it's easy doing business with Fidelity. Call Fidelity now for this free excerpt from the bestseller One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch, plus everything you need to get started. Call 1-800-842-7900. Fidelity Investments. Common sense. Uncommon results.
Ricola, the all-natural herb cough drop imported from Switzerland. Ricola has been soothing throats and relieving coughs naturally for over 60 years.
Usually, when you send flowers out of town, you give the order to somebody who takes a cut. Then he passes the order to somebody else who takes a cut. But now there's Flowers Direct that actually lets you speak to a florist in the town where you're sending the flowers. Flowers Direct. All we cut is the middleman. Call Flowers Direct now. 1-800-621-2121.
Tonight, she claimed 6 personalities and sued her boss, alleging he turned her into a sex slave. The strange case of Anne Renee Colbert. Tonight on Larry King Live, 9 Eastern on CNN.
The folks behind the Mario Cuomo write-in campaign for president are poised to make their first paid TV pitch in New Hampshire.
Are in a national recession that is going to be worse than anything you've seen in 50 years. We are going absolutely down the wrong road.
This ad will run tomorrow through Monday, only on one TV station in the Granite State. Though he's not running for the Democratic nomination, the New York governor has said he won't interfere with this drive to draft him in New Hampshire.
Nice timing today by Dan Rostenkowski's House Ways and Means Committee. On the day President Bush formally announced his campaign for re-election, a hammerlock by the panel as it voted along straight party lines to reject a slimmed-down version of the Bush tax plan. That clears the way for the Democrats in Congress to write their own plan and gives the president more ammunition for his war against Congress. Both Bush and Patrick Buchanan are using the democratically controlled Congress as a whipping boy. Brooks Jackson now on their strategy and whether it can work.
George Bush.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
Patrick Buchanan.
We have challenged the President of the United States, my old friend George Bush, for the Republican nomination.
Running against each other for the White House, but both running together against Congress, especially in their New Hampshire advertising.
I ask the American people to let you know they want this action by March 20th.
Last week, Mr. Bush went before Congress and sounded tough.
I've given Congress a deadline of March 20th to pass my plan.
We need a president who will stand up to Congress.
To send a real message to Congress to get this job done.
I will stand up to Congress and get the job done.
Buchanan wants to send Bush a message. Bush wants to send Congress a message. They're using commercials like Western Union. David Keene, a veteran of several Republican presidential campaigns, is watching this one from the sidelines.
Focusing on the Congress as your enemy is not all bad from Bush's standpoint, because to some extent he's therefore able to spread the blame and not take it all himself.
Bush is bashing Congress because it's more unpopular than he is. Public disapproval of Congress at 38% a decade ago has risen in a recent Republican poll to 71%. And just a few days ago, when a CNN USA Today Gallup poll asked who is to blame more for the country's economic problems,
20% said Bush, but 59% said Congress. In his ad, Buchanan makes a bold promise to confront Congress. Maybe too bold.
I will use the line item veto and stop wasteful government spending.
Use the line item veto? That's misleading. There's no clear legal authority to veto specific line items within a spending bill. Even conservative legal scholar Robert Bork called the idea, quote, dubious. Bush's ads accuse Congress of blocking a painless economic cure.
Now the president has a plan to cut wasteful spending, create jobs, and restore home values.
Not the whole story, of course. Bush's budget puts the federal deficit at a record $399 billion for this fiscal year and at $352 billion for next year. David Keene, for one, says in the long run, Bush will have to do more than criticize.
So for him to come up to New Hampshire and say, send a message to Congress, begs the question, which is a question of whether or not he can lead the country.
But the Democrats in Congress oppose him again.
Both Bush and Buchanan are trying a new twist on an old tactic. Harry Truman ran against what he called a do-nothing Congress in 1948, and he won. But that was when the White House was Democratic, pushing for strong government programs, and the Congress was Republican. Brooks Jackson, CNN's Special Assignment.
And Catherine and I will be back in a moment.
Over 35 million people are dead. $1,700 cities and townships are destroyed. 6 million Jews were annihilated. War is a symphony of destruction.
Diesem Deutschland dingst du! Wird heute Deutschland in stolzer Freude deines...
Orchestrated by few and paid for by many. Now Time magazine allows you a forbidden look at World War II in a 2-part video set entitled World War II, The Untold Story, free with your paid subscription to Time. We've gathered unique films from the War Department and combined them with captured enemy footage, some never seen before in public. These 2 exciting videos can be yours, free from Time magazine. Let Time take you behind the scenes in politics, the arts, and social issues. Call now, and you'll get 26 issues for 3 easy payments of $9.89 each. That's almost 55% off the cover price. And we'll include World War II, the video set, for free. Fly with pilots on actual fighting missions and lay low in the trenches with our GIs. Help storm the beaches of Normandy and see confidential footage of Rommel in the desert. There is a horror to the nightmare of war and a glory. Call this number now and get great savings on Time magazine and your World War II video set free. This offer won't be available for long, so call now.
Coming up tomorrow on Inside Politics 92, they're standing on the sidelines, but are they straining to get into the game? We'll examine the possibility of late-date entrants joining the current crop of Democratic presidential candidates with a pair of state party chairmen. And that's it for this edition of IP 92. I'm Catherine Crier in Atlanta.
I'm Bernard Shaw in Washington. Thanks for watching. Lou Waters joins us now for a look at what's ahead.
Right, Bernie. Just ahead on Early Prime, floods and rain sweep through Southern California. We'll bring you up to date on the situation out there and what's ahead. Also, girls getting short shrift in the classroom, according to a new study, which indicates it all starts in kindergarten and goes through graduation. Join Cheryl Atkinson and me for Early Prime next year on CNN.
Coming up, Early Prime continues, followed by Showbiz Today, after a word from your local cable systems, next on CNN.